Hey gamers, ad break time. First, I want to remind you all that I now have a Patreon. If you want to support the show, visit patreon.com/Beyond Solitaire. I'd really appreciate it. Second, Beyond Solitaire is proudly sponsored by Central Michigan University's Center for Learning Through Games and Simulations. Right now, their second game, Rising Waters, is live on Kickstarter. If you'd like to play a peer-reviewed historical game and support a press trying to make more of them, definitely check it out. The campaign link is in the show notes. Thanks, let's get on with the show. Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and this week on the pod I have a very special guest. I got Fred Serval. He is a game designer. You might know him most from Red Flag Over Paris, but he's got more stuff coming up, so we should definitely talk about it. How you doing, Fred?
I'm doing really well, and I'm super happy to be here. So thanks, Liz, for having me.
Yeah, I'm super happy to have you on because you're not just a game designer, you're also a YouTuber of the channel Homo Ludens, which I think we will get to in a moment. But first, tell us about your game. Tell us about Red Flag Over Paris.
Well, Red Flag Over Paris is a game that I started thinking about in 2018 and actually did a first viable prototype of in 2019. And at the time, I was just starting into game design, and it was thanks to a friend of mine that I was playing with every week called Brian Ascliffe, that is also a game designer. And he actually convinced me to reach out to GMT and tell them that I had this prototype. And for me, that sounded insane as an idea. And he said, well, that's not insane. The game is good. You should reach out to them. It's a good idea. And I did. And surprisingly enough, GMT replied within the week and said, yeah, sure, we're super interested. Send the prototype and we'll see how it goes, which sounded absurd to me, just the fact that it was that simple. And then I sent a better version of my prototype, and we had some discussions, and decided to add it to P500 in late 2019. The game was released in December of 2021, so just before, just in time to hit the 150 years anniversary of the Paris Commune, because the game is about this, the Paris Commune, which is a socialist insurrection that happened in 1871 in France, specifically in Paris, even if other stuff happened across France also at the time. And it was a consequence of the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 that ended up in the late 1870, but the negotiation for peace was happening at the beginning of 1871. So on the backdrop of the end of the Franco-Prussian War, you had that insurrection that happened in Paris. My game is about this. It was my first design. And it's a rather small, simple game, card-driven game that draws a lot of inspiration from the structure, from the card play, from two games, 13 Days, and more specifically even Fort Sumter by Mark Herman. So those were the two core inspiration for the game, but it expands on it, plays with its core system, creates new ones, and adapts a lot of it to the specific event that I was trying to portray. So this is Red Flag Over Paris in a nutshell.
So what made you choose a socialist insurrection as your first game topic?
That's a really good question. I think so. The way I engage with the game, and I still do, but I started to do, is that when I was just a player, what I like to do is get into a topic, find games and find books about it, and explore and have that interaction between reading about the topic, watching documentaries, and playing games, and really have that full interaction with history through different mediums. This is something that I really enjoyed. And at some point, I really got interested in the Paris Commune and the Franco-Prussian War, and I realized that there were no games on the topic. And it was a bit of a frustration, and I was reading about it, and I was realizing there is not a lot of movies about the Paris Commune. There is no games about it. The number of books are pretty limited. And I was thinking about the fact that even though I'm French, I didn't really learn about it in high school. And I was starting to think, well, what's up with that? And how come I know about it? And I realized that there was a difference between popular culture on history of the Paris Commune in France and in the rest of the world, and the fact that it was such an important phenomenon for a specific part of the political spectrum, which is more radical left, which is a political orientation that I'm, just to be very transparent, pretty close to. So I've been a militant and active in radical left organizations, and I was rethinking about this, and I was thinking, well, it's weird, and I thought, well, there is no games on the topic. What could I do about it? And there is basically two ways. Either you go online and pester designers to make games, and that's usually not a great idea, or you can do the game yourself, and that's what I decided to do. So I thought, well, rather than complaining about the fact that there are no games on the Paris Commune on forums and Twitter, maybe I should just, like get to work, start reading and thinking, well, what could I do if I wanted to change that fact? And that's what I started doing.
That's awesome. So you mentioned that you didn't learn much, or definitely not enough, clearly, about this period in history or the Paris Commune in high school. So how did you choose to research this topic, and what kinds of media did you look at, and what did you find?
So I knew about the event because it's an important event for the radical left. It was pivotal for a lot of organization, and it's something that is being remembered. So I knew about the event, but yeah, as I said, I didn't really learn about it in high school. And actually, there is a history behind it that is quite interesting about the historiography, I would say, of the Paris Commune and how it is portrayed. And so I basically knew about the events, but I didn't knew that much about how exactly it unfolded. There was a bit this myth about, oh, at that time in 1871, it was the peak of revolutionary momentum, and France almost got proto-communist or something like this, which is a pure myth. But that was this, and I was like, well, I would like to know exactly what happened. Who were the men and women that actually did this? What they had in mind? What were they trying to achieve? What happened to them? And when I started thinking about documenting myself, well, I looked for books. Usually, that's the first place that I come from. That I, when I do research, and what I like to do is usually start with a simple, overarching book that covers the whole event. And in France, we're really lucky because we have that collection called Que sais-je, which is a collection that takes a specific topics and covers all of it in very simple words. It's very easy to approach, but it's always written by someone who's like one of the absolute best in that domain, which is like this cool combination of accessible but also high quality academia. And the Que sais-je on the Commune is written by Rougerie, which is probably the best French historian on the Paris Commune. And also in those books, you have usually a great bibliography. So from there, you can actually start exploring other books. And I started reading about other stuff. On the military side, I read a book that really struck me a lot. I thought was really great. Robert Thom's The War Against Paris. It's a British historian that's also specialized in late 19th century France. Then Merriman's Massacre, an American historian, also specialized in 19th century France. And I started exploring a lot of books. There is one movie that is a 6-hour experimental movie made by a British film creator, which is it's a bit too esoteric leftist for me. Like I'm like, oof, that's a bit too much. So I tried to engage with that movie, but it was a bit too much for me. But then we also have actually a couple of comic books. France is a country that generates a lot of comics. Like we love bande dessinée, we read a lot of mangas, we make a lot of comics ourselves, and there are a few comics that exist. And I'm a big comic book reader, so I also engage through that medium. So you have Le Cri du Peuple and Les Dames de la Commune, that were two really big comic books that I read about it. So mostly this. If it was another topic, I would probably have engaged a lot more with movies because I like watching movies and documentaries and stuff like this. But yeah, that was the main way. Then it changed a bit also when I started making the game, and that's the thing. I realized that actually the process of making a game is also a good medium for me to do some research, to go even more in depth. And I think that was actually quite interesting. And I started also reading some, you say, or like actual material that were produced during the commune. So as we were talking about before, Le Journal Officiel, some correspondence of specific authors or politicians at the time. And I started also to get really a better sense and a feel of what was happening at the time and the thoughts of the people that were leaving the event, going a bit more in depth. So those are most of the stuff. I'm thinking about something I can't remember. I feel like maybe it will come back, but I thought there was also other types of content that I was reading, but that was mostly it. I think it covers most of it. Yeah.
So this has led to another question. It always leads to another question. I was really interested to hear you say that. So you knew mostly about this event from kind of your interest in politics and from your own political meetings. So this is probably something that you heard about the most for the first time as sort of propaganda. And how did making a game and going through the research process change how you felt about this event and about how political organizations that you've been involved with talk about it?
That's an interesting point. So the thing is that I knew coming in that I didn't know much, and that's the thing that when I got into it, I knew that something happened. That was for sure. That a lot of people died, and that was pretty much it. And that there was like a political intention that was surrounded by this sort of purity or something like this. But I knew that I didn't know much, and I knew that what I wanted to portray was the actual escalation of tension between those two factions that didn't really cover that much about what was happening in terms of their political ideology. It was more concrete, like what do we do on the ground. So I think it influenced in the sense that I had more sympathy toward the commune side, that's for sure. In terms of the people, I felt like more attracted to better understanding more about their lives and everything. So I think this introduced that kind of bias. But because I came in with acknowledging that I don't know anything about it, and that I don't really trust what I know about it, I think it's that's the kind of process that I went in, and I realized that, well, it's not really that we were lied to, but what it made me reflect is that the myth that was created was more than about what those people did, was a bit of a myth about martyrdom, and it in almost a religious fashion, you could say, because like those people died for the revolution, and they were some of the first one, and they were massacred and everything, but it didn't say a lot about what they actually did or wanted to achieve. And I think the myth of martyrdom is just, it's a myth, but it's still based on the reality. There was brutal war crimes that were committed by the government of Versailles, and nobody on the left or on the right contests that. Everyone agrees upon it. The only thing that people don't agree on is the numbers, but the numbers range from 10,000 to 30,000 people killed into a span of a few days. So that's enough. it's whether it's the lower end of the range or the higher end, it's still brutal war crime. So the myth of martyrdom is actually based on a fact. So that's the case. But I was actually pretty interested in discovering who those people were, what they were thinking about, and I just enjoyed that process. On the other side, what was interesting to me was also and that's the thing that I like to do and that I like historical games to show me, is also to better understand the motivation of the people who were on the other side. I always have this idea that people always make rational decisions. Their motivations are always based on different things, but I want to understand where those rational decisions come from. And actually, I understood a lot more about Versailles, about what they were struggling with, the kind of pressure they were under, and the fact that it wasn't, well, that clear. Like, of course, there was war crimes. Some people over there were really bad people, or they're enabled awful people to do awful things. That's not a question. But you do understand some of the constraints that they were struggling with through that process. And that's also why I wanted to make the game, because I wanted to challenge also myself about thinking on what was happening on the other side, what was their perspective, what we were trying to achieve, what were their objective, and what basically they had access, what were the tools to achieve those goals. And I still think that there was no reason to commit those war crimes. I think that's the stain. There was absolutely nothing that was legitimized it. There was literally nothing. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't necessary. It was pure like brutality and this doesn't change. But then you do understand why they collaborated with Prussia, why they maybe were a bit weak on the negotiations, where they were a bit more aggressive militarily. Like, there is a lot of thought that I understood while doing the research. There was a few things that I still think are unfortunately completely unacceptable, and I think it explains a lot about why the history is not that much covered in high school or until lately. But yeah, so that was the whole thought process. But I think what's important for me was to come in with this assumption: you don't know anything. Go there fresh. You might have an attraction, like, or a bias toward more sympathy on one side or the other, but you want to understand what happened overall. So that was the approach.
I like it. You say you're not a historian, but you've got all the instincts. But we're gonna come back to that in just a second. First, I just want to clear the air on this. There is a solo mode for Red Flag
Yes.
Over Paris, but you are not a solo gamer.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement to say that I'm not a solo gamer. I'm known for being annoying to people asking for solo modes and everything. And we talked a bit about this. But what's your question? I won't.
I guess I just wanted to clarify. Like, did you have any say in the design for the solo for this, and do you recommend it? I've not actually played the solo, so I'm just curious. Because I know people who listen to this podcast will just want to know that. So I'm just gonna clear it up before we talk about YouTube for the next forever.
So just to be clear, I didn't design the solo mode, obviously, because I'm not that kind of person. Originally, the person that started working on it was Luke Billingsley, and then Jason Carr took over and finalize it. And Jason Carr has this mind of making even me, I think, are great solo bots. And I think that so their work together actually came up with what I think is a great solo bot, because it, what I like in a solo mode for a 2 or multiplayer game is that it doesn't change the experience, and what you learn playing the solo bot will still be useful playing a human opponent, and the game does that. I did have some involvement in making it. So I had some discussion with Luke and then with Jason around what would be viable strategies for the bot, what they should be aiming for. So really thinking about what should be the brain, the thoughts or the objectives of the bot, but then how they came to realize that objective or deliver on it. I'm not able to do that, and this is where Luke and Jason afterwards really structured this and came up with that finalized solo bot. I did test it a bit, and I actually also did tests for other solo bots that are released by GMT, like the one for Twilight Struggle, Red Sea, and those stuff. So I do test them, but usually when I test them, there is always someone running the solo bot for me, which is very stupid. And it's usually someone that I spend a lot of time with that is always there to help me through my design work, and someone that I really count a lot on, called Joe Dewhurst. And Joe is basically the guy sitting next to me, being my additional brain that manages the solo bot for me, so I can interact with it, test it, give my thoughts and opinion and everything, and help refine it if I can. But the person running the solo bot is never me. There is always someone next to me, which defies the purpose of a solo bot. I understand that, but then again, yes.
The amazing invention of 2-player solo.
Yeah.
Oh man. So I am really curious to try this. But for now, I want to talk about your interest in history and how else it plays out in your gaming life. So you've got a YouTube channel. It's called Homo Ludens, and you named it for Heisinger's book, I'm assuming.
Yes, yeah, that was based. Yeah.
How did that get started?
So how did it get started? It was interestingly around the same time that I decided to make a channel. Is the same time around when I decided to start designing a game. And usually the thing is that when I really get into something, I really struggle to stay a passive consumer. And it happened to me through my whole life. When I was a teenager, I really got into music, listening a lot of music, but I couldn't only listen. So I found a radio station, and I started being a radio DJ over there and going up and up, and ending up having my own show. And I've did a lot of radio shows when I was in university and stuff like this. Started making music myself and doing all of that. And then it was the same thing when I got into beer. I got really obsessed with beer. I drank a lot of it, but then I was like, I need more. I need to understand how beer is done. And I started brewing. I set up a microbrewery at my office, and I wanted people to engage with it. So I always have this thing at some point where I get really obsessed with something. I need to engage with it myself. And I always have that wish to share with people what I think is interesting about that thing. And in my late 20s, I really got into historical board games. And after a few years of playing a lot of them and becoming obsessed with them, I started thinking, well, I want to share that passion with people that that I think would be interested in. So my target audience was my brother. Like the archetype was my older brother. So people who were interested in history and interested in board games, and to show them there is this amazing niche of board gaming that is actually historical board games, and you need to know about it because it's so cool. And that's the thing. That's why I started this channel, because I thought that historical board games touch upon a lot of interest I had, which is how do you interact with history, and thinking about the medium. How do you learn? Was also something that I was interested in. How games can shape, as any cultural object, our perception of history. So I really thought about it like really fully as an object, and I really wanted to engage with it. And the more I did those, the more I thought about it, and the more I did content, and the more new questions came up into my mind about what are the ethics of making a game about an event that portrays war crimes. What is the responsibility of the designer? What is the responsibility of the player? What happens because we're touching upon something that is extremely sensitive? History is very sensitive. So, and I started, yeah, and it grew up from there. And now, yeah, it's a few years in, and I still have this show, and I feel like in a lot of ways, making games and making content about games are two sides of the same coin.
Oh, that's interesting. So you started making YouTube videos at the same time, roughly, that you became a designer.
Yeah, it's a more or less an accident. I think those two things happen because there is another event that happened in my life that made those two things possible. Is I changed jobs and I changed countries. So I used to be working in consulting agencies and advertising agencies in France, in Paris, and it took a lot of my time and energy. I could game, but that was pretty much everything I could do. And then in 2018, I got hired by a big toy company in Denmark, and I moved there. And the thing that happened over there is that my life changed a bit. The lifestyle in Denmark is very different than what it was when I lived in Paris. And also the company that I started working with had those policies about making sure that employees also had times for themselves and everything, and actually had all of a sudden a lot more time and a lot of energy. And I was like, this is the thing that I'm passionate about, and it enabled me. So the thing that was the big shift, and the fact that those two things happened at the same time, just that it was at that moment where I had the free time to actually being able to deliver on those interests that I had.
Jesus, that toy company hiring? No.
Yeah, we are hiring. Yes.
So I was actually going to bring up the toy company because I feel like you're a person who, as your life is currently configured, a lot of it is really devoted to play, but in a really serious way.
Yeah.
Play is your job. You are interested in historical gaming, which, I mean, as we just started talking about, right? Like there's a certain amount of responsibility and seriousness that you have to bring to that sector of gaming in order to get the most out of it, at least in my opinion. So, I guess I would like you to talk a bit more about how play is surfacing in your life in different ways, given that it's what you work on, it's your hobby, it's your side gig. Is there such a thing as too much play, or are you making it work?
So, yeah, I think it's really interesting because what you're saying, because I do think that there is this, and we talked a bit also about it before we started recording, about how people perceive play. And also one of the things that changed in the fact that my lifestyle changed when I got into that company. And I'm not allowed to say the name of the company for corporate communication reasons, but the thing that changed is also the time that I had, but also the perception that I had of play. Because in that company, play is serious, because play, first of all, is a source of income, but also the culture of the company is that play is a beautiful thing, and it's a thing that kids can learn a lot from, kids and adults. That it's a beautiful tool, that is something that is everywhere, and that actually, when you think about it, is in a lot of different places in our culture, and is a very powerful and useful tool. And in a lot of say, you could say, if you look, for example, at in the US, your process to elect a president of the United States, it is a game. Like you have those number of voters and everything, and you have to reach that specific number of points and everything. And in a lot of ways, games are everywhere. It's just that, or at least some aspects of gaming are in a lot of part of our culture. They are everywhere. And just the fact that some of it is purely non-productive and purely for fun, and in a way doesn't count, creates a safe space to actually engage with a lot of really interesting things, and makes it a powerful tool. The gamification is everywhere. It's just that there is the purity of the pure game that has no consequence, that makes it something special, either to learn or spend a good time with people that you love, or engage with history. And that's the thing. But I think the fact that I started working for that company helped me a lot on that, and the fact that I saw value in understanding history through the gamings that I had, actually, it made me realize that game was more prevalent in our society than what I expected. First of all, so, but then I also thought it was a great tool and something that I wanted to explore more, and I think that people should be more interested in overall. Yeah.
So with Homo Ludens, I know that you do a mix of playthroughs and interviews. What does it take for you to decide to cover something on your channel? Like, do you have a set of mental criteria that you're using to determine what you want to talk about? Are you limiting yourself to history? Like, how much of a specific program do you have in mind?
It's really through vibe. Like I don't think too much about it. Each time I try, and that's the thing, I have those phases. I always have this moment where I'm like, gonna get a schedule. I've got my editorial line. This is who I got to talk to. Those are the things. And sometimes I have this phase where I'm really super structured. I have a timeline. I have an Excel sheet and everything. And it's really the two sides of me. There is a part of me that is really analytical, very structured. It's like, gotta get shit done. You got to structure your thing, and you've got to have a strong doctrine, and you're going to do it. And then I have this plan, and then there is the other thread that comes in. It's like, yeah, we'll see about that. It's like, and then it goes with the flow. And then there is a rough plan, and I think it's more and I think those two things, the fact that I go with the flow and the fact that I structure, they both come from the same interest that I have. At the core, there are topics that I want to address. There are people I want to speak to. There are games that I want to cover. It's just that there is two sides of me, one who wants it to be very structured, the other that goes with the flow, but they have the same objective, those two threads, you could say. And so it's hard for me to have a plan, and also just because it's a hobby, I do it on the side. There is a lot of things that come in, like my personal life, my work life, and those comes first, more than YouTube. I don't monetize anything on YouTube, so I don't get any income. It's pure pleasure, and I don't want to monetize it or get sponsored or anything. So this also comes in, and then there is on the other side the people that I invite. Most of those people are not professionals, or when they are semi-professionals. They also have a work next to their design works or everything. So you have to play around with this. So it's always always a bit hard or unrealistic to have a structured plan. But overall, the thing that will make me want to talk about a game is two things. Either I enjoy a lot playing it, and even if I think it's stupid, it's doing poor history and everything, sometimes there are just games that are just good, and I cannot help myself. But if it's problematic, I would think about, do I want to showcase them on the channel? We always have this discussion. If it's not too problematic, I'll probably go for it on a whim or something like this. But overall, what I want to address is usually what I want to use the channel for, is to explore difficult discussions. Not difficult because they are painful, but because difficult because sometimes they're hard to wrap your head around. And usually that's the thing that are going to decide me about. I want to cover this game because it's showing something different, showing a different aspect. It's showing how historical gaming can be different from what most of the community is thinking about. Because the community I come from is war games, and they're very narrowed on war games, is military history and everything. And what I got interested in war game is that I got interested in it because they were historical games. The fact that it's only military story, I actually find quite dull. I want it to be more broader than that. So I think we should open and welcome the fact that you can have very operational warfare, but you can also have more political stuff about how do you start a war, how do you end the war, what happens when there isn't a war, like political tension, economical tension, and everything. And so yeah, that's the thing. So or games pushing the boundaries that would interest me, definitely showing different angles, showing different perspective on history, or discussions around what it means to make a game, what it means to engage with a game, ethical discussions, the evolution of representation, or how does the games reflect the state of historiography, or more of popular culture, because it's probably closer to popular culture than actual advanced historiography in academia. There's a bigger delay, I would say. And those topics are usually the thing that are going to drive me. And then there are just also a designer that I love spending time with, and that's also a thing that is going to have a big influence, and it's also the people. So Volko is often on the show because even if sometimes we disagree about stuff and everything, I still have a lot of sympathy for the person. I love his games, and I love the guy, and so I want to have him on the show. Mark Herman, I like arguing with him a lot, and we like pushing each other and pushing our buttons and everything. And those are the things that are factors that are there. And it's, yeah, so that will also have an impact. How do I feel about the people that I invite? So it's, yeah, it's sometimes I try to be structured, but in the end, I have a general intent of what I want to do with the show. But the way it happens is more organic.
Yeah, it's funny because as you describe it sounds actually quite a bit like me. The reason I do my podcast in seasons is so that I can plan some of it and then comfortably kind of fill in some more episodes without getting like stuck, if that makes sense. Like I never want to be desperate for the next episode, but I also want a little bit of freedom in my planning. So
I feel the same.
And like, on my own channel, like I mean, I'll cover whatever solo game I like. If I feel like it's worth making a video about just because it's fun, I will absolutely do that. But typically, if it's a game I want to really talk about, like the thing for the podcast for me is, do I want to talk to someone about this for an hour? And if I don't, it's not going on the podcast.
But that's a great rule. Like it should be rule number one, I think. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I'm actually sad for people who have to make content. Like I would hate to do this, like to have that constraint to have to talk to someone that you don't really like about something that you're not that interested in. It's awful. It sounds, I wouldn't want to do that.
I think the pull of historical gaming for me too is it gives you, and operational war games are interesting, but I think I'm with you on, I like to think about historical gaming more broadly because I want my games to give me something to talk about. I want my games to give me something to think about. I want my games to send me off to read a book or watch a documentary because I also enjoy that kind of multimedia. Like, let me learn everything about this topic kind of experience. And there is no other part of our hobby that can do it like a good historical game, at least not for me.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a lot of the most thought-provoking games I played are in that part of the hobby, like most of them. I'm not saying that there are not interesting games that happen in the rest of the hobby that is a bit more accessible to the greater public and everything, but I think historical gaming is usually the most thought-provoking experience that I felt. To be clear, I do love some operational board games. I play Hex Encounters and stuff like this. It's just that I don't want the hobby to be only that. I think it's great that we're opening up and seeing it broadly to other stuff. But yeah, I agree with you on that, definitely.
Yeah, and I think, speaking of variety, I also think that games give us another way to consume history. Like, I love to read books. If I had to give up games or books, it would not be a question. I would keep the books. Like, no, not even, I wouldn't think. But I love board games. I have a whole channel about them. And also, I feel like they are a different way to approach historical problems because you have to be really deliberate about what goes in that game, what you choose to model, what you're asking players to do. Do you find also that, engaging with historical board games specifically makes you think about historical questions differently than if you just read the book?
I think so, yeah, because then again, I'm saying this, and my answer is to be taken with a grain of salt because I've never written a history book, so that's so I cannot really compare the two experiences. But I feel like by nature you're going to ask yourself very different questions. For example, someone making a book about the history of the Paris Commune. Well, the decision that they have to make is which importance they give to each source, why this is important, why it's not, and how do you build the narrative in your book. So what you're going to highlight, maybe not keep in your storyline, how you're going to structure that storyline, what are the characters that you're going to show, or the biggest event that you're going to focus on, and everything. But basically, this is what you're doing. There is a layer that you're thinking about is how is the reader going to interact with my book, because they're going to pick up the book and reading from beginning to end or speak a specific section and everything, but they are not going to have an active engagement with the object of the book. And it's the same for the movie. They're watching the movie or watching your documentary. The fact that they are sitting down, laying over, like, doesn't really change much. In the game, I think there is an additional question, which is, what am I asking the player to do? What does it mean? What is it representing? And is it fair to ask them to do those decisions? And fair is, in the sense that what kind of experience that I want to offer them. Is it really useful to ask them to do this? And what does it mean? Because in a lot of ways, I feel like historical games or a form of role play, and you're thinking about, okay, what role am I giving the player in that history? And was that person or that faction or those group of people that they are role playing really had that kind of power, really had that form of agency, really knew about this, really did that for that reason? What kind of dynamic I'm offering? And I think this is where the challenges come, and you have to balance what is your intent and the ethics of it, but also the fact that you want to offer a ludic experience or something that is engaging as a game, and finding that balance between the history, the experience, and what the experience is saying about the history, but also making sure that the game is engaging, is another layer of complexity, which I think is quite hard. It constrains you in simplifying the history, like you cannot, because at some point, like you need to narrow down what you're doing and maybe bring theme where you can, and that's the thing. And that's another challenge. How do you simplify complex historical events? What do you decide to put under the rug or not represent and everything? That's also another challenge, which I think is different. So I agree with you that you will not replace a really good and well documented book to understand the history, but in a sense, the fact that you're asking a player to engage with an historical model, something like this, gives you a heuristic experience that you understand through learning, and you can be put in the position of the person that had to make some of the decisions for the group. And I feel that in a lot of ways, sometimes it makes those decisions more understandable, because there is, for me, two things: understanding, knowing what happened, and understanding why. And I think that knowing what happened, books are way better, and you cannot hardly beat that. But understanding why those things happen, I think this is where game have a role to play, and where they are a powerful medium, because they can bring this.
Ooh, I think it's a really good way to put that. That's nice. I'm filing that in my head. So the other, I want to kind of pull at something you said earlier in our conversation, which you mentioned covering problematic games. And I always think that's an interesting word. And like, I'm just interested in your answer because I struggle with this too. Like, what is the difference between problematic, but it's worth giving it some historical criticism and paying attention to it, and problematic, I'm not going to give it any air on my channel? Like, how do you make that decision, especially given how difficult it is to talk about like problematic things right now socially in internet culture?
Yeah. So there is two layers to it. There is what I think and feel, and then there is outside, how I expect people to think or feel about the fact that and I think those are usually two very different things. Usually I like to engage in stuff, but then I would do it on my private time. I have to be careful about the fact that even if I have a very small audience, it's still hundreds of people that will watch a video. I don't know each and every one of them, and I have to think about what I'm doing. So I have to be a bit careful about this. So what I would do in private and what I would do on the channel is always going to be a bit different. I think a good example of that is, for example, there is a game that I played a while ago, and I want to play again and organize a gameplay of it. It's called After Pablo. I don't know if you know about this game. It's a game about, so it happens right after Pablo Escobar gets killed, and you're actually playing different cartels, and you're trying to reinstate the cocaine trade to North America. Awful topic, disgusting, highly problematic, amazing game. And that's the problem. And it's like, well, it's a really interesting game. There is a lot of interesting things that it says about how do you, like, what power means for those non-political or marginal organization. And I think it's really interesting in that way, the kind of dynamic that it has. It is in very poor taste, but at the same way, it is pretty well done. But I don't think I would ever show this game on my channel. Like, I would not say that I don't know this game and I never played it. I wouldn't lie about it. Yes, I engage with it, and I think it has some interesting elements to it. But I would feel a bit uneasy to cover it on my show because I think there is a lot of things that are problematic with it. So this is where I think that there is maybe those things where I'm trying to figure out, and so that's the first thing. And then I'm also trying to think about, and it's the same when I do a game, is me doing this video, am I doing this video because I'm not sure that someone else will do it? So I have to do it because I think it needs to be done, and I'm the one thinking about it, so I have a responsibility to do it. And I think there is also this thing. So, for example, when I did the panel on civilian victimization and how designers should think about it, and how to represent or not represent it, I was really thinking, well, I don't really see anyone necessarily on right now thinking about this, and having the ability of bringing so many designers that cover those topics in their game, and having them talk together in an environment where they felt that they were not going to be judged, but we can address together really difficult questions about those topics. So this is usually what also is going to be driving me, is what can I do that will be useful for the community, that like this sense of, yeah, uh, not that that my perspective is unique, but I have the platform and I have the means, and what can I do that could help in that sense. So this is really what's going to be driving me. And of course, sometimes I do stuff just for fun, but that's also a different story. But yeah, and I'm still always trying to think, how useful is it going to be to discuss this topic and address it and everything. Um, and it was another example of this is I was very happy to have Harold Buchanan on the channel when Flashpoint Sex Tennessee was released, to actually do a teach and play, because it was showing the game, but also more specifically because I wanted to say at the beginning of that session with Harold, to talk about the age-old question, what is a war game? That I found a very stupid question in most of the time. I think it's an interesting topic, it can be, but the way it is discussed online, I find extremely infuriating. And I was like, well, that was also a great opportunity to always think about those things, that what can we talk about when I'm portraying about that game, and what topics I can push, and I can use my platform to actually drive some of the conversation in the direction that I think is interesting.
Yeah, I like that approach to thinking about like what is actually interesting or useful. Just I hate this and it shouldn't exist. It's not interesting or useful to say,
yeah,
a lot of the time. But can I have a deeper conversation about this? I mean, anybody who designs, I think, a historical game, even if it's just a game, opens themselves up to a conversation about what they were trying to say. I mean, it's no different from an author writing a book and somebody citing the book and quoting the author.
Yeah.
If there's something to talk about that's actually going to get us somewhere interesting conversationally, then that's what I'm looking for as well. But so you've mentioned that video games too, you consider part of this larger conversation. So like when you think of gaming, do you think of like, we talked about defining war games as well, right? Like, to what extent should we all be siloed in terms of how we talk and think about games? Or do you see it all as one big community?
So I see it as a pretty big community, but there are still some significant differences between tabletop games and video games. And I think there are material differences, but there is also a difference in terms of nature. And I think in terms of nature is that when you play a video game, you don't have to read the rules. And the rules are externalized. And that means that your engagement with the object is superficial. You're only engaging with your inputs, and you see what is the output, and you learn from there. In a lot of ways, the game is learning the rules in some way when you're playing a video game. Like when you're, for example, when you become a competitive Street Fighter 2 player, well, what you actually do to become a competitive player, you can play the game without understanding it. It's instant. But if you want to become a competitive player, you learn the rules. You understand how is the hitbox, at which frequency you can give your impact and everything, what kind of damage it can give. And you learn the rules to become competitive, but you don't have to. And in a way, it's a very different experience. When you're playing a board game, the game doesn't exist if it doesn't exist in your mind, which is already something that is radically different. Like the rules are here, and that's very different. The game is here, actually. And I think this is by nature different. But still, the output is to take time to interact alone or with friends in a playful way, something that doesn't necessarily have real life consequences, to engage with an object that is providing fun. So that's the idea. So in that sense, it's generally the same thing. And then there is a difference in terms of material, is that board games are a narrower niche. Video games is a massive industry that is incomparable. It's comparable to cinema, probably even bigger, whereas I would say that probably board games is even smaller than publishing. So it's a very small cultural niche. So in that sense, maturity, it's also very different. And then the production is going to be radically different. You're going to have way more games, video games that are being released than board games. So of course there is a bit this difference, but I still think that it's still the same kind of activity in a way. And when I think about history, I think in gaming, it's interesting to think about it in that larger scope. I don't engage with video game as much as I engage with board games, but we just started something with a couple of guests exploring the depiction of Vikings in gaming, and we're taking the focus on board games. But one of the guests is actually someone whose specialty is actually to do some streams where he play video games, and he talks about how history is depicted in those video games. And that's a person that I really wanted to have on, because I think that I wanted to broaden that scope of what is a game, and leverage his perspective from a video game sense. So I think there is a connection, but there is still some significant differences. But I think there is one big family of gaming.
Yeah, I might go steal that guess myself. But yeah, actually, I struggle with also, I play a lot of video games, and I often want to cover them on my channel, but I feel hesitant about it because it's like I feel like people come to me for the board games, but also, I mean, it is a solo game. It is my channel. Like,
Yeah, in the end, you do whatever you want. So that's
yeah.
We should, yeah.
But you've kind of moved the opposite direction in that you don't play video games very much anymore. I feel like you've gone from video gamer to board gamer and not necessarily like back. So how did that end up happening? And like, how do you feel about that decision?
So the way it happened is just that I was there was some point in my life where I realized that most of my time working was spent in front of a screen, in front of a computer. And then when I had free time and I wanted to blow off some steam, well, my output was to put myself in front of a screen, and most often than not in front of a computer. And I was like, well, that's not great. Like at some point I need to find something else. And I wanted to find a different way to spend time, but still have fun, because I like playing things. And I also wanted it to make it possible for me to engage more in real life with people. There was where I come from in gaming, and we're talking about this, like my first moment where I was like, wow, gaming is amazing, is I was 6 years old. I went to a friend's house and he had a Famicom at home. We plugged it in and we played Mario Tennis, and it was like amazing. But what I thought was amazing was the video game, the medium, but the fact that I was playing with my friends sitting next to me. And I think that for me, for a long time, gaming was Famicom, Super Famicom, and all those things that I grew up with were games that we were actually playing. And I have really good memories of being with some friends, spending like a rainy Sunday afternoon and just being together, screaming at each other and playing together the video game. And the way we engage with it was very different. And then I grew up and video games stayed, but I felt like something got lost. And what I think one of the things that got lost is, first of all, well, computers was not only fun anymore, it was also work, and it was a big part of it. And that was like work ruined the magic of informatic and computers to me. That was the first thing. But also I realized that I lost my friend sitting next to me. Like when you're playing with a friend, you're playing online and it's cool, but it's not the same. And I felt like, multiplayer in-house, like real life in front of the TV, I missed that. And I think that board game was solving a lot of those things. Less time from the screen, in front of the screen, but also more time, spending time with people, which was something that was important for me. In a way, board game is just a medium to drink beers, eat chips, and just have fun with friends in a lot of ways.
Nice. So have you completely quit video gaming, or do you just pick very selectively at this point?
So yeah, that's what we're talking about. I didn't really give up on video games totally. I play a bit. I almost don't play on the computer anymore, but I have a Nintendo Switch. I like it a lot, and I still play some video games. So recently I've been playing Disco Elysium, which I think is an amazing game, and it reminds me of something that I liked when I was younger, which was those point and click games, adventure games, but with a theme that talks to me as an adult and everything. I also play, it's so funny, I play a lot of board games type of games on the Switch. I think Slay the Spire is probably the game that I play the most on the Switch. I absolutely love it. I think it's a great game, and in a lot of ways, I want to make games on the board game format that draws inspiration from this. And we play also a lot of Root online. So the Root video game is actually probably, I think, one of the best way to engage with the game in a lot of ways. It's really fun. So in a way, I find ways to emulate a bit what I feel when I play tabletop games while playing video games. But yeah, I do pick some of them. I like puzzly types of game like Into the Breach and stuff like this. So I still have this, but yeah, I play a lot less.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Do you feel that the video games that you choose to play are as historically engaging as the board games, or is that something that you typically choose to do on tabletop?
That's something that I do on tabletop. And the reason for that is that when I engage with history, I like to force myself to have the rules into my own head, because I think that a designer is creating a model of what they think history is, and I think that's what I like doing. So I like engaging with that model, understanding where they came from, what was the idea of the designer, what they wanted to portray, and everything. And I think the best way to engage with that is to actually play a tabletop. I don't really have, yeah, I don't think I played a lot of historical video games. In the past, I did. I played some Europa Universalis, which is, I think, a quite interesting game. It has a very specific view of history, but that's another discussion. And you have a podcast about that, so people should go and watch that. And then I think Total War as a series is also something that I engaged a bit with, quite a bit. And then a bit more distantly, Assassin's Creed, but more in the way that to show that video games do an awful job at portraying history. But yeah, I've never been a big Assassin's Creed fan, but I followed also a lot of the discussions around history depiction in those series of games.
Interesting. So, first of all, I just want to thank you so much for being on here. But I want to ask, so we talked about all this historical gaming, right? We'll go into the easy question, which is, what are you playing for fun right now?
What do I play for fun right now? That's a really good question. I'm looking. I think what I've been playing a lot for fun right now is Brian Boru. But in a way, I think it does actually a pretty interesting job at showing political dynamics. So I think it's probably unfair. I don't want to say that Brian Boru is not also an intelligent and interesting game at depicting history. But yeah, Brian Boru. I play a lot of trick-taking games right now. Because there is someone in my war game club that is really into trick taking, and the thing is that trick taking is the first game that I learned to play. So I learned to play tarot as a kid, and tarot is a big part of our gaming culture in the place of France where I come from. So I usually right now I've been playing a lot of trick taking games for fun.
Oh, that's awesome. Also, I know that Red Flag Over Paris is your first game, but do you have any upcoming games that you're willing to talk about with the media?
Yeah, sure. So currently on P500, you can pre-order a Jest of Robin Hood, which is an iteration on the coin system, but with some significant changes to it, and that transfers the system into Nottingham in the 12th century. So your one player is playing Robin Hood and the Merryman, and the other is playing the Sheriff of Nottingham and his henchmen. So this is currently in P500, and the idea of it is to make a family-friendly, accessible introduction to the coin game with a twist. And that talks also about the emergence of modern state in medieval times. It addresses the topic of insurrection, and also talks a lot about politics, actually, in some small and light ways, but still a lot of topics that I'm interested in or there. And I think that representing Robin Hood and the Merryman as an insurgency is already fun in itself, and enabled me to talk about a lot of different things that I thought were funny to address. And then I'm currently playtesting a game on the beginning of the Franco-Prussian War, which is building on the system released by Shakos Games. So Shakos released a series of games on Napoleon 1807, 1808, and 1915, and using that system and transferring to another era that had like some difference in operational warfare and everything. We're adapting this to the beginning of the Franco-Prussian War. And right now I'm also working a lot on a game, and I'm mostly in research phase. I already started some design notes and everything, but I don't have a prototype yet. But it's really something that I'm focusing a lot on right now, on the Battle of Algiers. So thinking about Algeria, Battle of Algiers, and potentially another game more diplomatic that will come afterwards. But those are the things that I'm thinking about. But I'm also making stupid games. So that's the thing. I actually just released a prototype called Medieval Snail Monster Hunter, where you're playing a party of adventurers and you're fighting snails. And it comes from this idea that in the manuscripts of the medieval era, you always have in the margins those knights fighting snails. And I thought, what if that was an adventure game? And from that stupid idea and discussion that I had with Joe Dewhurst, I actually made up a stupid little card game inspired from Slay the Spire, and you just move. You have an adventure, you have different encounters, you encounter snails and you fight them, and they drop loot and you become stronger and stupid stuff like this. I don't know if this will ever become a thing or if it would just become a print and play, but yeah, that's also something that I'm working on right now.
So I'm just gonna say right now, I would 100% play that. Actually, one of my cloth COVID masks has medieval snails printed on.
Then it's definitely for you. I'm working on a new version to refine a few things in the systems and everything, but I'm happy to demo it to you at some point when I update the TTS module. So yeah, just feel free to ping me on Twitter, and we can find the time to play around with it. It is very dumb, but it's actually pretty funny. So yeah.
I would 100% play a stupid medieval snails game. Sounds great.
Good to hear.
And then for people who want to reach out and follow you, where can you be found online?
So the place where I'm the most active is Twitter. So if you look at Fred Serval, you can find me on Twitter quite easily. I mostly talk about board games there. Sometimes there are some political stuff that come up, but it's usually playful. I'm not very serious on Twitter. So that's, it's a place where I make a lot of jokes and annoy people. I like to do. So that's what I do on Twitter. Then I'm very active on Board Game Geek. So you can send me emails over there. I would be usually pretty responsive, and I'm pretty active there. And then I'm really active on Discord, but that's going to be on a server by server basis. So a server where I used to be very active, but I'm always there having a look. That's the Coin Player Discord server, but there are a few Discord server where I have a playtest Discord server and different things. But yeah, those are the places where I'm most active. And then on YouTube, usually I read all of the comments that I have. I answer to most of them and all this. So that's also a good place to reach out.
Excellent. And of course, I'm going to link all your stuff in the show notes below. Thank you so much for coming on. Those of you who are out there, y'all probably know I can be found anywhere online as Beyond Solitaire, but you should definitely be going to check out Fred Serval's stuff.
Thank you, Liz.
Yeah, absolutely. So everybody out there, please like, subscribe, comment, ask questions, and most of all, happy gaming.